On June 22nd, 2020, a week prior to the writing of this episode, director Joel Schumacher died of cancer. A prolific director throughout the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, he's perhaps most famous, or infamous, depending on how you look at it, for his entries into the Batman film franchise in the 1990s, and I thought maybe this would be a good time to talk about them. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, this guy just died, and my response to that is to shit all over his legacy by dunking on his movies while showering praise upon the Tim Burton films, because everyone knows that the Burton Batman films are objectively better, right? We'll see. In the late 80s, after the success of Batman comics The Dark Knight Returns and The Killing Joke, Warner Brothers started looking into adapting Batman to the big screen.
I feel the money hairs on the back of my neck going woo woo woo.
Tim Burton was hired to direct, and despite a fair bit of controversy at his hiring and the casting of Michael Keaton as Batman, the film was a massive success, earning over $400 million against a $35 million budget. Fans praised its dark tone, especially in comparison to the 1960s Batman TV show, and a sequel was greenlit. Batman Returns, released in 1992, still performed well, but not quite as well as the first one, largely due to its increased violence, sexual innuendo, and scenes too frightening for children.
Just the pussy I've been looking for.
You know, for kids.
It made enough money to warrant another entry in the franchise, but Warner Brothers knew that they would have to change gears. Enter Joel Schumacher. Handpicked by Burton himself, he was instructed by producers to create a lighter, more family-friendly Batman, and the result was Batman Forever, which made over 3 times its budget at the box office, outperforming Batman Returns by over $50 million. This film was far lighter in both tone and aesthetics, leaning away from the German expressionist influence of the first 2 films and taking on more of a deco-punk meets Tokyo veneer. The dark, frightening villains of the Burton films were replaced with more cartoony, kid-friendly villains, and the production design was injected with more color and bright lights. With the money this movie made from the box office receipts and merchandising, Warner Brothers rushed a 4th movie into production.
I feel the money hairs on the back of my neck.
With Batman and Robin, Schumacher was instructed to go even harder into the colorful, cartoony aesthetic, to the point where toy company Kenner was brought in to work on designs for costumes and vehicles. And this movie did not do well. It only made $238 million against a budget of $160 million. Critics panned it, audiences panned it, the cast and crew panned it. George Clooney allegedly gives out refunds for anyone who paid to see it, and Joel Schumacher himself is on record apologizing for it.
If I disappointed them in any way, then I really want to apologize, because it wasn't my intention.
So there you have it. Burton is God, Schumacher sucks, the end. Right? Everyone loves the Burton films because of how dark and gritty they were, and hate the Schumacher ones for how campy and silly they are. But guys, the Burton films were also campy as fuck. It just wasn't as readily apparent because of the expressionist architecture and moody lighting. But come on. Look at this shit. Is this really that much sillier than this?
You didn't invite me, so I crashed!
How is the Riddler's plan to drain the thoughts of Gotham citizens and expose Batman's identity any cheesier than the Joker's plan to poison Gotham citizens with cosmetics? How is Mr. Freeze's plan to freeze Gotham for ransom any dumber than the Penguin trying to become mayor and then blow up Gotham with an army of penguins with rockets strapped to their backs? Come on! Schumacher was hired to make sequels. It's common practice when making a sequel to take whatever it was that made the first one successful and do it bigger. Except Schumacher was given explicit instructions not to make Batman Forever as dark and violent. So what was left for him to work with? The camp and the silliness. And shots of grappling hooks. And honestly, I don't even think Batman Forever is that much campier than the first two. The first two also had flamboyant villains with cheesy one-liners, themed henchmen, color-coded bad guy vehicles. The biggest difference is that Schumacher's Gotham is a little bit more colorful, and is that really so terrible? Look at both versions of the city. The aesthetic is very similar, just one is dark and depressing, and the other one is bright and lively. I think they're both beautiful, visually stunning depictions of a comic book city, both created by talented artists with their own unique visions. And I really don't think one is necessarily better than the other. Hell, the design of Gotham is one of my favorite things about the Schumacher movies. As for the looks of the villains and their henchmen, and even random street gangs who are covered in bright blacklight paint, a lot of people made fun of these decisions, but I actually think it kind of works in-universe. This is a city where a man dressed as a bat fought a clown and a bird monster with a circus-themed gang. Everyone has a gimmick, so I think it makes sense that street gangs would adopt this idea and dress up in wacky theatrical colors. Also, while Burton's Batmobile is unquestionably the best live-action version of the car, I think the designs and props and vehicles in the Schumacher movies are way cooler. The tools Batman uses in the Burton movies are just utilitarian black rectangles, and the Batcave is literally just a dark room with a bunch of TVs in it. In Batman Forever, on the other hand, H.R. Giger, the guy who designed the Xenomorph alien, was hired to design the Batmobile. And while his design was rejected for being exactly what you would expect from the guy who made this, you can feel his influence all over the new Batmobile and Batwing. I don't like Schumacher's first Batmobile quite as much as the Burton one, but the new Batwing? Man, look at this fucking thing. Look at it! This is way cooler than the doofy little thing we get in the first Batman. I'm just going to record this bit on my phone because it's fucking whatever. But in the video originally, I said that the Batmobile from Batman and Robin is the weakest of the three. But I've been sitting here editing, and I've been looking at the cars kind of side by side for a while, and I don't know if I feel that way. Like when I was a kid growing up, I thought the one from Batman Forever was super cool, but now looking at it, it's like they were trying too hard. You know, they were trying too hard to be kind of like edgy and cool. You know, like the thing is way over designed. Like, put the fucking pencil down, guys. It's the Batmobile, all right? It's not a fucking black metal band logo, you know?
Going for a little ride on my love machine, baby.
That's racist. No. Whereas the one from Batman and Robin is like, I don't care. It's a beautiful car. You know, it is like Art Deco, the Batmobile. It's got all these beautiful curves to it, and it's very reminiscent of like 1930s luxury vehicles, you know, like the Mercedes-Benz 540K and everything, with all those like lines and curves and shit. And yeah, it doesn't have like a canopy on it, but the one from the Adam West Batman didn't either. And I think that was kind of part of the Art Deco look that they were going for with it, not having the canopy over it. And, you know, the bright lights on the front end, and like it's got blades and shit on the front. Those are kind of stupid, but overall, like the shape of this thing, I like it. It is pretty. Whereas the one from Batman Forever, it was like they were trying too hard. It was like something like an edgy teenager would draw. I don't know. It's not great. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to throw in there. I don't like the Batman Forever one as much as I used to, and I think that the one for Batman and Robin is better. Okay. And I quite like Redbird, Robin's motorcycle, with its gorgeous 1930s-inspired curves, reminiscent of the Henderson Streamline in the Vincent Black Knight, the latter of which was actually name-dropped in the previous film. The rest of the vehicles in Batman and Robin are dumb. They were clearly designed by toy manufacturers. In addition to the vehicles, all of Batman's tools in the Schumacher versions are beautifully crafted Art Deco-inspired masterpieces. And while they might be a little too form over function for some people's tastes, these are movies about a guy who dresses like a rubber bat, so whatever. Speaking of which, yes, I know that the suits in Batman Forever and Batman and Robin have nipples on them, and yes, it's stupid, but it's been over 20 years, guys. Get over it. If a couple half-inch rubber circles is enough to ruin an entire movie for you, then I think you might have some larger issues that need to be addressed. The action also takes a step up in the Schumacher films. In the Burton movies, Batman largely just kind of walks around, occasionally kicking and punching someone or taking them out with a gadget. But, and this is probably due to improvement in suit design, Schumacher's Batman actually fights. After 2 movies of Batman slowly lumbering around, we finally get an agile Batman, capable of performing martial arts and aerial gymnastics. The action sequences are fast, exciting, and frenetic. And I know that decent action is not necessarily a good movie make, but Batman is a character who has spent decades obsessively learning martial arts, and the Burton movies just do not sell that. So while film is a visual medium, the visuals don't count for shit unless they're in the service of telling a story. And for all their style and flair, the Burton films are kind of lacking in that department. The problem with Burton's Batman is he has very little character in either Batman or Batman Returns. He has no arc as a character, and for the most part, makes no decisions that advance the plot. It comes down to the concept of wants versus needs. A protagonist's wants are external driving forces that push the plot along, and the protagonist's needs are internal driving forces that complete the character's arc and turn them into a complete, fully realized person. So, what does Batman want in Batman 89? He wants to stop the Joker and avenge his parents. Super cool. What does he need? In Batman Returns, what does Batman want? To stop the Penguin, Max Schreck, and Catwoman to have a relationship with Selina and Kyle. What does Batman need?
Shit, I don't even know. I can't even tell you that.
In Batman Forever, what does Batman want? He wants to stop the Riddler and Two-Face, he wants to have a relationship with Chase Meridian, he wants to guide Dick Grayson through his trauma so he doesn't go down the same destructive path he did, and he wants to give up the cape and have a normal life. What does Batman need? Batman needs to finally confront his own trauma, reflect on the decisions that brought him to where he is, stop blaming himself for the death of his parents, and overcome his obsession with revenge so he can finally be at peace. In Batman and Robin, what does Batman want? To stop Poison Ivy and Mr. Freeze, to be a father to Dick Grayson, and to protect his loved ones to the point of trying to control death. What does Batman need? To understand, Dick Grayson doesn't need a father, he needs to be his own man, to learn that you cannot control death and push it off forever, and that sometimes the only way to succeed is to let go of your control and trust others. Now, of those four movies, which ones sound the most compelling? Tim Burton's Batman has no needs, and his wants are fairly uninteresting, which means that Batman is not a driving force in his own movies. Every single action he makes is reactionary, and this makes him a completely passive character. They make a big deal in Batman 89 about how Jack Napier created Batman and how Batman in turn created the Joker. But even in the scene where Napier falls into the vat of chemicals, Batman did that by accident. Watch this scene. Did you catch that? Napier shoots, Batman deflects, and Ricochet hits Napier's face. Batman tries to catch him as he falls, but he loses his grip. This is possibly the most crucial moment in the entire movie, and it was all the result of Batman reacting to Napier's actions. It was an accident. The entire film is like this. Every single decision that advances the plot of the movie is made by the Joker. For all intents and purposes, he's the protagonist of the film, not Batman. Having the villain be the protagonist isn't necessarily a bad thing. Avengers Infinity War used it to wonderful effect. But even in that movie, the heroes also make decisions that advance the plot. And not only that, but no one in this movie has an arc. Everyone finishes the narrative in the same place they began. Except the Joker, I guess, but he's dead, so that doesn't count. But even Jack Napier turning into the Joker doesn't count, because he was a murderous dickface at the beginning of the movie, and he was a murderous dickface when he died. The only difference is that they palette swap him 40 minutes into the film. Batman Returns is no better in regards to Batman as a passive character. All the plot-moving decisions are made by either Max Schreck or the Penguin, and with a single arguable exception, everything Batman does is reactionary. The good news is, this film improves on its predecessor with how it uses its characters. The film has three villains, the Penguin, Catwoman, and Max Schreck, and each of them serve as a mirror for Bruce Wayne. Penguin was born into a wealthy family and orphaned at a young age, and now resides in a subterranean lair with a bunch of animals, just like Bruce Wayne. Selina Kyle is a victim of horrific, violent trauma and copes with it by dressing in a mask and lashing out with violence, just like Bruce Wayne. Max Schreck serves as almost an anti-Bruce Wayne, as both are wealthy businessmen and prominent figures in Gotham, but Schreck is willing to lie, cheat, steal, and murder for personal gain. This is used the most effectively in the relationship between Selina and Bruce, as they both see each other as kindred spirits and bond over this, but in the end they're both unable to deal with their trauma in healthy, constructive ways, and this prevents them from having a real life together. When it comes to dealing with the villains in Batman Forever, Batman is still largely reactionary, although it is a decision by Bruce Wayne that kicks off the entire story.
That's not gonna be good for me. I need an answer now.
I'm sorry, Ed, then the answer's no. Tampering with people's brainwaves, mind manipulation, it just raises too many questions.
In addition to that, the film's B-plot is entirely about Bruce Wayne finally confronting his trauma. The death of Dick Grayson's family at the hands of Two-Face, and watching Dick struggle to deal with this, brings back a lot of painful memories for Bruce, memories that he'd never dealt with before. Ultimately, this causes him to explore why he became Batman in the first place, and choose whether or not to continue.
You see, I'm both Bruce Wayne and Batman. Not because I have to be. Now, because I choose to be.
This is the first Batman movie where the title character is a fully realized protagonist, with his own wants, needs, and goals, and the rest of the characters of the film, ally or antagonist, are consistent with these themes. The script for Batman Forever has scenes that dig even deeper into Bruce Wayne's psychology and flesh these ideas out more fully, but they were deleted before the movie was released. Now, I know I'm on record as having said that you have to judge a movie how it is, not how it was intended to be, but this video is primarily an attempt to defend Joel Schumacher, and the studio wanted these scenes cut to tighten up pacing and make the film more interesting for children. So, yeah, those scenes aren't in there and shouldn't count overall, but I submit that it isn't Schumacher's fault. Batman and Robin, to its credit, still tries to maintain Bruce Wayne as the main protagonist, but there's just too much going on. It tries to explore ideas of control, trust, and family, and while there are still some good moments, specifically between Bruce and Alfred...
Alfred, am I pig-headed? Is it always my way or the highway?
Why, yes, actually. Death and chance stole your parents. But rather than become a victim, you have done everything in your power to control the fates. For what is Batman, if not an effort to master the chaos that sweeps our world? An attempt to control death itself.
It all kind of gets lost in everything else, and some of the proceedings in the movie are so wacky and cartoonish that the occasional quiet, heartfelt scene almost feels out of place. These scenes are good in a vacuum, and I feel are great at exploring Batman as a character, but the tonal shift to get to these scenes is incredibly jarring. Also, I like the idea of a conflict between Batman and Robin, but the way it's handled doesn't always work. The conflict starts out with Bruce Wayne trying to be a father to Dick Grayson, but Dick interprets this as Batman not trusting him and trying to control him, and this is an interesting dynamic to start the movie off with. This is illustrated beautifully in a scene where Mr. Freeze gets away because Robin rushes him without thinking, forcing Batman to save Robin while Mr. Freeze escapes. And then later, during a car chase, Batman disables Robin's motorcycle so the same thing doesn't happen again. But then the conflict shifts from that to fighting over Poison Ivy, and that's where I feel it falls apart.
Sometimes counting on someone else is the only way you win.
Your head wasn't even on the job. All you could think about was Poison Ivy.
You just can't stand that maybe she wanted me instead of you.
A lot of it's super hokey and it's hard to take seriously, especially since the script doesn't give Chris O'Donnell anything to work with, certainly when compared to the last film. He's been turned from a real person experiencing real trauma and real emotions into a whiny bitch. There's still elements that show that Schumacher tried to tell an interesting human story, but at the end of the day, he bought into the cartoon aspect way too much after the success of the previous film.
I feel the money here.
Michael Keaton is widely regarded as the best Batman, at least from that era, and yep, I agree with that assessment. He was the first actor to do separate voices for Batman and Bruce Wayne, and it almost feels like two separate people. I used to feel that his Bruce Wayne was weak as shit, but upon rewatching the movies for this video, I picked up elements of his performance that I didn't notice before. I always used to see his Bruce Wayne as kind of a dopey soccer dad, and he didn't seem like the kind of tortured, obsessed man who would deal with his trauma by becoming a masked vigilante. But then I realized that that was the whole point. Whenever Bruce Wayne is interacting with other characters, he's unassuming and genial, but get him alone or with Alfred and his entire demeanor changes, and his pain begins to seep through. I feel obligated to point out this scene, however, which seems, out of character.
Oh, you must be some kind of jerk.
Look, you're a real nice girl and I like you a lot, but for right now, shut up.
That's assault, brother.
I used to think Val Kilmer did the best Bruce Wayne, but watching him now, I think that's because he has more to do as Bruce Wayne than Keaton did, and Batman Forever has a more in-depth exploration of his character. Also, he does have a more commanding presence than either Keaton or Clooney, and he's physically the largest of the three, so it's nice to have a Bruce Wayne that actually looks like he could kick the shit out of you. Like, say what you will about Keaton, this is not intimidating.
Lights out! Now you want to get nuts? Come on! Let's get nuts.
But beyond that, his performance is largely one note and wooden, which is disappointing because Kilmer is actually a fantastic character actor. His Batman is fine, better than Clooney, but a far cry from Keaton. While Clooney's Batman is without a doubt the worst, I think his Bruce Wayne is better than a lot of people give him credit for. He's no Michael Keaton here, but I find his interpretation to be less one note than Kilmer's. His Batman really isn't great, though.
Hi, Freeze. I'm Batman.
This franchise taps some great actors to play the supporting cast. Jack Nicholson and Danny DeVito were both inspired casting decisions and completely knock it out of the park. Michelle Pfeiffer also was brilliant as Catwoman. Jim Carrey is an absolute blast to watch from the early scenes where he's doing his best Brad Dourif impression. Did I say breast?
Wow. Freud was right.
From the early scenes where he's doing his best Brad Dourif impression to later on when he's completely devouring the scenery. Like, if you don't get a kick out of watching the Riddler hucking grenades around the Batcave, I don't know what to tell you. You're a joyless automaton who hates fun. Tommy Lee Jones was a brilliant choice for Two-Face, or would have been if the character we got was actually Two-Face. As it is, Tommy Lee Jones was giving a performance that I feel was closer to the Joker, but I would argue it's not really his fault, as the script completely mishandles Two-Face, replacing his duality and conflicted personality with puns. There's a scene where he continues flipping his coin until he gets the answer he wants, which is not what Two-Face would do. They take a key part of the character's psyche and turn it into a gimmick. Also, he was forced to ham it up more than usual so as not to get swept up and eaten by the scenery black hole that is Jim Carrey.
Kill the bat! Sounds like a good idea. But have you thought it through? A few bullets, a quick splash of blood, and then what? Wet hands. Post-homicidal depression.
In Batman and Robin, Uma Thurman knows exactly what movie she's in, and she is going hard into the camp, and she is having an absolute blast doing it.
I want us to be together, but I want to make sure you're serious about turning over a new leaf. I need a sign.
How about slippery when wet?
You know, for kids.
I have to say, though, that Batman and Robin does a huge disservice to the character of Mr. Freeze. They lifted his backstory directly from Bruce Timm's Batman the Animated Series, which was a good idea because it's the best.
Take it easy, man. I got you.
Leave him. He should have been more careful. Now he's paid the price for his incompetence.
But it takes him from a dark, emotionally damaged, sympathetic villain into a giant Austrian pun machine, and it's not great.
How's that guy? Cone of phrase.
There are little moments peppered throughout where you get glimpses of the character as he should have been portrayed, but they're way too far and few between, and the tonal shift is jarring. Like, how the hell do you go from this?
Icicle, I'm Mr. 10 Below. Thing! Call me snow miser. Whatever I touch turns to snow in my clutch.
Come on, thing!
To this. And to be honest, Schwarzenegger isn't completely miscast as such a tragic, solemn character as Mr. Freeze, based on his work in, say, Terminator 2. You want cold and emotionless? Look no further. I totally understand that casting decision. But when we should have gotten this...
I know now why you cry. But it's something I can never do.
We ended up instead with this. That said, though, it's nice to see Batman go up against a main villain that's actually a physical match for him. Like, if you look back at all the movies, he's fought 2 disfigured senior citizens, an overweight dwarf, 2 90-pound women, and a scrawny nerd in a leotard. Finally, in the 4th movie, he goes up against not 1, but 2 villains who could rip him in half without breaking a sweat. And since it's been brought up, yes, the Bane featured in Batman and Robin is a terrible interpretation of the character. I don't think a comics-accurate interpretation would have worked in this movie, so on the one hand, they probably shouldn't have incorporated him at all, but honestly, I'm kind of glad they did because of how fucking hysterical this is. Also, John Glover gives the single greatest performance in the entire franchise.
You psycho!
Well, I can respect your opinion. Sadly, I'm not good at rejection. I'm afraid you'll have to die.
When Tim Burton stepped down as director for Batman Forever, Danny Elfman also left the franchise, and Elliot Goldenthal was hired to replace him, and he does a great job. His scores perfectly capture the mood of Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, and his Batman theme perfectly encapsulates the character. However, Danny Elfman got there first and composed the single greatest Batman theme that ever has existed and ever will exist.
Your entrance was good, his was better.
But I need to emphasize that this does not mean that Goldenthal's score is bad. No one could have gotten close to what Elfman did with the music in the Burton movies. That said, Elliot Goldenthal's Two-Face theme is brilliant. It's very reminiscent of Prokofiev, and it perfectly balances dark and sinister with lighthearted and innocent, and does a better job of representing Two-Face and the duality of his character than either the writing or the performance in the movie. Also, Batman Forever features a song by the Flaming Lips, which is always a bonus.
You hate your boss at your job.
Guess what I did today?
But in your dreams, you can blow his head off.
And it gave us this absolute fucking banger.
Baby, I can pay you to a kiss from a rose on the grave. Ooh, the more I get of you, the stranger it feels, yeah.
So, are the Tim Burton movies really better than the Joel Schumacher ones? I honestly don't think they are in any significant way. Some might prefer the darker, moodier aesthetic and the more extreme violence in the Burton movies, and that's perfectly fair. But it isn't fair to say that the Schumacher movies are worse just because they're too cheesy, especially given that Batman and Batman Returns both have a substantial amount of cheese in them as well. And from a storytelling perspective, I'm probably going to get flack for this, but the Schumacher movies did it better. They told more compelling stories about a complex, interesting protagonist, whereas the Tim Burton movies just told the story of a stiff, one-dimensional character trying to stop the bad guy. Batman and Robin went off the deep end with the cheese, becoming what many have described as a feature-length toy commercial, but it still offers a better exploration of the Batman character than either Batman or Batman Returns. And since we're talking about it, Batman and Robin is hysterical. It's so funny, you guys. Look at this.
Ladies and gentlemen of the United Nations and our mystery bidder.
Commissioner, you have 11 minutes to thaw these people.
Enough monkey business. We've got work to do.
Monkey work.
How can you not have fun watching this? I'll be honest, this might be the worst one, but fuck if I didn't have an absolute blast rewatching it for this review. And I'm sorry, but if you look at the history of Batman, there is a lot of cheese there. It's an integral part of the character's history. Even the more serious versions in the comics still have a giant penny and a dinosaur in the Batcave. So I'm pretty sure that from a completely subjective standpoint, Batman Returns is my favorite, but from a critical standpoint, Batman Forever is the most well-rounded of the franchise. It still offers some dark themes and imagery, along with some camp, but not enough to ruin it. The action set pieces are a huge step up from its predecessors, and unlike the films that came before it, Batman Forever actually explores its title character and treats him as the main protagonist, instead of merely a reactionary force getting in the way of the villain. At the end of the day, Tim Burton made fun, visually stunning, highly influential movies that feature Batman. Joel Schumacher, on the other hand, made Batman movies.
Would an imbecile come up with this? I designed it myself. You know, for kids.